Hey, just like that, we are live, coming to you from the Philadelphia MTC. My name is Rich Ross, and somehow I wound up in this seat this week. How's it going, Andy?
It's going great, man. It's nice to, you know what? It's a nice change of pace here.
A little bit, right?
No, Chris is the best. We love Chris. But he's still here.
He is still here. Where is Chris? As we go to him.
So we're playing musical chairs.
Yeah, there it is.
Chris is working the controls tonight.
Attempting to work the controls. Not sure that it's going to be quite the pro level, but we're working on it here. It's fun. It's fun.
I am hearing an echo. Where do you think that's coming from?
I'm trying to figure out which machine that's coming from.
So it might be that puck.
TV.
Turn the volume down on the puck.
Oh, okay.
So he's going to look and try to fix this audio problem. But Rich, you flipped over to the dark side. You know what I mean?
Bit.
You know, it's cool to mix things up. I actually look forward to sitting behind the controls too. It's nice if we each learn all the different roles in the thing, so we can each sit in different positions. You and Chris have been doing this longer than me, so
I think it's one of those things where it's a little bit of, you know, it's a different way of being out in front of the camera versus being behind the camera, having to be able to be behind the camera. That's the one. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Just at minus.
So Chris is trying to figure things out. We're talking here. Oh yeah, that totally solved I don't hear any echo anymore. That's awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, I think. Well, no, I still hear a little. Is it coming from the TV behind you? The TV has the audio.
It's muted.
Oh, it's on muted.
Yeah.
So
see, this is
we've got this
stuff.
We've got this cool studio that we do need to show, like, spin the camera around one of these days and show what this whole place is like. It's really pretty cool. And you get to work here all the time. Like, this is like a cool.
This is my home. A lot of fun here. So I think we took care of that. That's cool.
Yeah. So back sitting here.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Have us all back together again this week after doing my traveling of last week.
That's true, right?
And we missed you at Code Camp.
Yeah.
We did a live broadcast from Code Camp, and Chris had, something came up. I mean, it's just what happens, right?
Yeah, we did have a family emergency. Everybody was fine. Nobody was ever in danger. Just couldn't be here.
Yeah.
So happy to be back.
Family first.
Yeah.
Family first, yeah.
Here we are the day before Halloween, right? And so tomorrow night, if you're in the Philadelphia area, there was talk about trick-or-treating being washed out.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Great. But now the latest forecast is that the rain will be gone in time. So we'll see. My daughter is certainly...
That's not what I saw. I saw still rain all day.
Well, I did too. They were just talking about it on one station, saying, I think it's going to move out in time. So if you're watching from the future, you can let us know how your Halloween was.
in the comments below.
Right. And if you like talking about Halloween, make sure you hit like on this video.
Or just hit like, even if you don't like us talking about Halloween. Subscribe to our channels and like.
Right. What do you think they would like for us to talk about tonight?
I know what we're going to talk about. The question is, will they like what we talk about here? So
I think they don't know they're going to like it.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is one of those topics that people don't know they're going to like it.
Yeah.
We talked about this a little beforehand.
Definitely.
And they don't know how helpful it is.
Mm-hmm.
And once you start using it, and when you're using Azure in a substantial way, and you're not just playing around, which some people are still doing, right?
Yeah.
Like hobbying with Azure and learning about it.
Sure.
Once you start doing it at a real, like, sort of enterprise level,
right.
Our topic tonight is really helpful.
Yeah. There you go. So this is one of those things when you think, and we talk to customers all the time about their subscription and how do they put controls around their subscription, right? So costs don't get out of hand. They don't have a ton of resources around. They have resources in places that they don't expect those resources to be, such that they also can understand, well, who created those resources? Who's responsible for those components that got created? And we're going to be able to do that because we're going to talk about something that's really core and fundamental to the Azure infrastructure and the governance of Azure when we talk about Azure policies, right?
Azure Policy. Yep. Policy doesn't sound... So, we've done a bunch of shows so far.
Yeah.
And, we talked about progressive web apps. We talked about Blazor. We've talked about...
building a web application on a storage account.
And this sounds the least sexy of all those, I think. It sounds the least sexy.
As a developer, it's not a topic I would want to be aware of, right? Or at least it's not top of mind something I want to be aware of.
But... again, so we talked about this a little bit. And by the way, can I say that I'm looking at the Mixer stream, and the stream is still called Progressive Web Apps. Now, does that matter?
It
Can
won't.
he change that live or not?
Yeah.
You can change that live. Is that what you're working on?
Turns out that's actually what I've been working on.
Oh, okay. All right, cool. So one of the things I said is that, at work, and you know this because you've helped out with some of this, we're converting a lot of stuff over to Azure, right?
Right.
And it's when you have, one app in Azure, everything's great, everything's easy, right?
Sure.
You got an app, you got a database, you got a couple things. We're in my organization, we're going to be putting 100 apps, in whatever app means. So
Right.
take that generically,
In the
right?
generic sense,
functions or apps or whatever, who knows what they are, but 100 or plus things in Azure.
Yeah.
And if you've ever used the Azure portal, you would know that the list of resources gets really complicated, right? There's a lot of sort of organization involved. And so, that's one of the places where policy can help. It actually help in a lot of places,
right?
But what I found is that as soon as the devs on our team start using Azure, and I say to them, well, we're going to have some Azure policy for some things, and they kind of look at me like, what's this Azure policy thing? And I start to explain it, they say, oh yeah, that's going to help. And I have to say that was like surprising for me, because I kind of thought they were going to be like, oh God. And they already realized how helpful it would be.
Right.
So, governance is kind of important. Now, as a manager, I'm using the air quotes because my title's not manager, but I'm in a managerial role.
Yep.
Right? There's a lot of stuff that's important to me that I want to make sure that devs are following certain standards, certain guidelines, that they're not spending too much money in Azure. No offense to Rich, because you like it when we spend money, right?
Well, we want to do it the right way, right?
Yeah, right.
You don't want to overspend.
And it's sort of easy to make a mistake.
Sure.
You can do that in Azure. And so this can kind of provide guardrails.
Right.
So
let me ask you this, if you
sure.
don't mind. So how did you get started defining the policies? Because policies, they can go from, basically something very simple. It's to make sure that items as you create a new resource group, a tag gets associated with it.
Right.
And tags are important because they help identify, maybe who owns that resource group and all the things that are in it. Tags can also be used to define, as you create resources, who the resource belongs to from a business perspective. Maybe it's the finance app, and this is all of their stuff.
Maybe that's like a cost center.
Exactly.
Potentially, right? Yeah.
Potentially, right. And that's important because tags show up on the on the spreadsheets that help you define or help you identify the costs in your Azure subscription. So, how did you get started when you guys started talking about policy?
It's a good question. How did we get started? I think, we had, one of the things is, we had a workshop at this very building
right
here.
Right, yeah.
And, you actually told us a lot about some of these things, and I started hearing about Azure Policy. And again, it was one of those things like, skip that and move on to something more exciting.
Right.
But it's kind of stuck in my head, and I went back and started doing more research and started looking into it. And, I think we really started with the basics, and I have a lot of ideas for policy. We haven't implemented as many policies as we plan to. But we started with some of the basics that we saw over and over again in the examples, right? Which is tags, which is what you just talked about.
Absolutely.
That's like the first one. And then what was important to me was naming convention. I wanted to have policy around naming resources so that they are discoverable in the portal. Now, the portal has a lot of features and a lot of rich things that you can do with it, including searching and filtering for resources. And so that's okay. You can certainly find things that way, but I know it's going to get more complicated and more complicated. So we wanted to have naming conventions on things. And we haven't gone too far with this, but the next thing that stuck in my head, I think what happens is this works in tandem. You asked, how do we get started, right? So my advice is, put a pin in it and keep it in the back of your mind, right?
Okay.
And as you're going through your design sessions and you're thinking about your Azure migrations, and you're thinking about this, think about how could policy help? And so the next thing that sort of popped in my head is, I have to make sure that we don't overspend by mistake. Right? It just seemed obvious. Like, I don't want developers creating VMs that are uber expensive. When they don't need one.
Yes.
When they don't need one. And so I started like worrying about like, oh my gosh, our Azure bill is going to go through the roof if devs start like creating things. How are we going to deal with that? And so I started thinking more about like, oh, we can use policy to help with that.
Right. So what was that first one that you created, I guess, to kind of...
Well, the first one was naming conventions,
Which isn't...
Oh, no, sorry. The first one was tagging.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, which makes sense.
Right.
We actually...
It's sort of out of the box.
It is.
Right.
It is. And it's one of the ones that, for our internal subscription here with all of my fellow architects, there's 5 of us, and we go through and look at the end of the month and like say, well, who created all of these things? So we had to throw that in there. And it is an easy one to implement, right? It's out of the box. Define, specify a tag for a resource group, or require a specified tag for a resource group.
For a resource group?
Yeah.
I think I was doing it for a resource.
Oh, you were doing it at that level.
At a resource level. Everything gets tagged. In our organization, everything gets a tag.
Okay.
Right? So tagging,
makes sense.
Yeah, tagging is one of those things in Azure if you're not familiar with it. You want to, I think I'm the expert, but a tag is, an attribute that you can assign to something. So I've got an app service.
Yeah.
I want to tag it with attributes, just like if you have a blog, and I say this blog is about Azure, so it gets an Azure tag, right? Mm-hmm. Or on think of a hashtag, right? On Twitter, I hashtag things.
Yeah.
So I tag things, and so the tags that we like to put on there, at least we're starting with, what you said, owner. Now, in our case, owner is not a person. Owner is a team, right? So basically, which team does this resource belong to?
Right.
And I mean which development team, not which business team in this case, right?
That makes sense.
Owner. And then the other tag that we're putting on things that we're requiring is the environment that the resource is going to be deployed to. When I say environment, I mean, is this production? Mm-hmm. Is it QA? Is it UAT? Is it one of those things, right? Yep. And we're using tags for that.
Okay.
And I have other ideas. I'd like to do a tag for public versus private. So I'm thinking like, just things that'll help us from a reporting perspective. What apps do we have that are out in Azure that we intend to be private and which do we intend to be public? Right. Now, the tag isn't going to make them public or private.
No.
But we can use it to audit and say, hey, if it's private, it should have something else that makes it private.
And just to be clear, when you say private versus public, it has a private endpoint that's, a private endpoint so it's not accessible over the internet, and a public endpoint so it's accessible over the internet. So,
and I think that would be like helpful from an audit perspective, so we can look back and we have these tags associated with stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that'd be cool.
Yeah. We should,
we can do that. You want to show and see what's...
why don't we do one tag?
Yeah.
Right. And then we can get into more like organization of stuff because I think we want to have talk about the bigger picture. But I think it would be kind of cool to show like how do you take a tag? How do you say that a tag is required? Right?
Yep. Okay.
So
let's bring up Andy's screen.
Yeah, I can bring up my screen. There it is. Okay. Nice. Cool. So I'm in the Azure portal. This is my personal subscription. This doesn't have a mask on it because this is I don't know if it really matters so much for this. Anyway, it'll be okay. Everyone can see my personal email here. That's okay.
Send your comments too.
Yeah, send your comments to me. So if you look in definitions, there are all these definitions about of policies, right? Policies, there's 2 parts. There's a definition and an assignment. So that's kind of
right.
Important, right?
And understand that there are a number of policy definitions that come out of the box,
right?
With your Azure subscription, and you can, just because those policies exist and are defined doesn't really do anything. It's that you're assigning that policy to some resource in your subscription or in your environment is where that policy now starts to take effect.
Right. So I'm in this area and I'm looking at, there's all types. There's a bunch of different filters. There's custom. And we want to look at built-in types in this case, right? And there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Right. And you can get some ideas of things that you might want to do.
And you can filter them. Yep. In that box you got there.
I was going to go to tag, and I see here it is: require a tag and its value, append a tag and its default value, add a tag to resources. Add is interesting. Does that mean it's going to actually put the tag on resources on Earth? Can you do that through policy?
You
sounds like it.
You can. Yes. Some of those definitions will take place after the fact.
Yeah, interesting.
Some only take effect on new ones, so it depends
yeah.
on the definition of the policy.
So I'm going to go to require a specified tag, not require a tag and its value, because I'm not telling you the value, right?
Right.
I want to require a specified tag.
Hey, Andy, how does it look if you control plus once or twice?
Yeah, I was wondering about the
resolution.
It's just a small font in the portal.
That's
I
cool.
can do that.
Is that better?
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
It looks better. Thanks for bringing that up, Chris. So I went to require a specified tag, and I'm in the definition of it now. I want to assign it, right? I could have done this from the assignment area or from the either way, but you can get an idea of what this looks like. It's basically, JSON, right?
Yeah. Just a big old JSON document.
And why isn't my scroll working all the way? The inner scroll isn't. Oh, maybe there is an inner scroll. I thought there was. Okay. So
you might be zoomed in too tight.
So you can see right here, there's a policy rule, and it says if, and the tag name is going to come out of the parameters. So it's giving you a clue that we can parameterize these things.
Yeah.
And it says deny. Now, somewhere up in here, there's probably a setting that says, well, when I go to assign it, I think there's a way to say we can either deny or we can audit.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave it on deny anyway. So I want to assign this one. Okay.
Now, that's a good point, because deny is one of those properties that are all of the policy definitions only allow you to do it. Well, you can only deny, you can't allow, I guess is the best way to say it.
Right.
So deny is one of the options you can put in there for the enforcement of it. But that means that if I deny something at a high level and I have child properties or child artifacts underneath it, they're going to inherit that deny, even though I might have something on the child objects that don't have that policy in place. Right. It's always going to inherit from above. And there are ways to escape out of that, and we'll show that.
And so deny, to be clear, what happens if I make a deny policy and I go to create a resource?
Yeah, it's going to prevent you from creating that resource if it's
deny. Cannot create the resource. Simple as that.
Unless you follow the rule that's in there.
Unless you, well, of course, right. And then the other option is audit, I believe. Well, there might be more than two.
There are a few, but audit's the other big one that you might hear. And what audit will do is kind of give you a sense of what would happen if I do enforce this policy and make it a deny policy. So you can get a sense of how out of compliance your subscription or your multiple subscriptions might be within your organization.
Right.
And kind of give people a heads up and say, hey, this is coming. Start taking remediation before we pull the switch on this.
Yeah, right. So the first thing it's asking me is the scope, right? In my case, I only have one subscription in here. I think we're going to talk more about scope soon, but in this case, I'm going to choose the subscription. I know it's actually, and I'm going to choose my Visual Studio subscription here. And you can actually scope this to a resource group. I want to say that this tag is going to apply to everything in my sub, right? So...
But you have that granularity of control, which is pretty cool.
Right. Now, I've never used exclusions, so I'm going to skip over that.
Right. So just to describe that, though, you've got your subscription.
Let's see what it does. Yeah.
And all of the resource groups in your subscription. This gives you the ability to say, well, this resource group doesn't fall under that policy, and I can exclude that resource group and whatever's in it from listening to that policy. So if you have...
You can do excludes.
Yeah. One example where you might do this, you might have a policy that says users of my subscription cannot create network controls.
Yeah, sure.
So I can't define a virtual network inside of my subscription.
Right.
I can do that everywhere except for one of those resource groups, and I can allow the folks who have the permissions to do resource group or to do network creating, do that inside of that resource group. So it starts to put some of those controls around,
right?
Because creating a virtual network inside of a subscription can have all kinds of effects if they're not named correctly, right?
Right. Okay. So now policy enforcement is enabled, and then there's a description, and that's not all that interesting. So what we really need to do is go over to parameters, and this parameter has some things defined, right? I mean, it has the policy in the definition has parameters, and I guess I should have showed that clearer when I. So basically it says tag name, and it basically, I don't know if it gives you anything over here, name of the tag, such as environment. In our case, we're going to say owner. Yeah. Right?
And tags are just key value pairs. So you can put whatever you want in there for the key, and then the subsequent value can be whatever you need it to be.
Now, I honestly don't even recall remediation, as if you want to, I don't know what that is, but we're just going to create it, right?
Yeah. So remediation will let you, essentially, if you have artifacts in your subscription that don't meet the policy, they can remediate it for you, and it can do it under a managed identity, which essentially is an account that has the permissions to go ahead and do that.
So I'm going to go and review and create it, and I'll create. Let's see, and it created. It's done, right?
That easy, right? That's simple.
Quickly. And I could add another one. I mean, if we were doing this, I would probably come in here and I would come in and create my other tag. And let's do 2 of them because it'd probably be interesting to see it. I'll scope it the same. You can do this stuff quickly. And if I'm not mistaken, you can do this with ARM
as well.
Yeah,
yep.
Right. So you can have you can have a whole repo of all your policies and just deploy them. Let's do this. Let's go to the next one and say what I say environment, right? Environment. Okay. And so I'm not saying there's a pick list of values. It's just environment. I don't know if there's a way to do a pick list. Maybe there is, but
well, all of the tags that you put in there will wind up being in a pick list when you go to define.
Yeah, you get that cool pick list, right? Yeah. I've seen that, but I wonder if there's a way to limit it to say I only want to allow like up to 4 potential values. I think there is a way to do that. I don't recall.
So for someone who's never used tags before,
go for it.
Is this a place where you define the tags, or are you just adding them to policies here?
So what we're doing is the tag was defined. It's an in the box thing that says we want to have tagging, right?
Okay.
And what we're saying is now, when you go and create a resource in this Azure sub, these tags are required for you. You have to put these in.
Okay.
And I'm going to demonstrate. I'll show it.
So when you say environment, that's not the actual tag. I have to now supply that value.
Bingo.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
That's the piece that I was trying to explain and probably didn't say so well. So I think I'm just going to go create a resource. I'll create a resource group. They're fast. What's the fastest thing to create?
That'll be the easiest.
I don't usually do that. I get still confused because this menu keeps disappearing.
Yes. I think
it's a way to. I don't know.
There was a way to pin it.
Resource. I guess I'm in here now. Okay, resource group.
Yep.
Now, hopefully this is a good example that works because I didn't check this in advance, and I'll know in a minute if it is a good one or a bad one. Yes. Okay, it's a good one. So. I'll tell you why in a minute. So I'm going to name this resource group
the
Tag Tester. So, I could call it the Dev Talk Show, but I might have that already.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we don't care about this stuff right now.
Yeah.
But look over here is tags, right? So this was here regardless of the fact that I created this rule.
Yeah.
Tags were there. But now, I'm going to skip this. I'm just going to go and create this. And if I do review and create,
it's going to validate because it thinks everything is fine.
Yeah, because from the UI perspective, everything was fine.
Right.
And when I go to create, if all goes well, resource group created.
And that's because it takes a little bit of time.
Oh, you don't think it's coding? It does take a while. I thought they took effect quicker than that.
It does take a little bit for that job to come through. Now I have a subscription where that one is in effect. We want to see what that looks like.
Yeah.
We can do that real quick.
Okay. And I'm going to keep an eye on this and see how long it takes to kick
before we come into mine there, Chris. Is this mine? Yeah. So it is. So you want to switch to my screen? And it's easy to tell which is which. I've got the dark theme going, and he's got the light theme going.
Nice,
so we can tell whose screen is up on what. So essentially here what we're going to do is we're going to create a resource group. Let me go back.
Yeah,
sorry.
Definitely zoom in here too.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to say resource group. I'm going to pick that. I'm going to say create. And this is the subscription where I know we have essentially we have a rule in place for it. So I'm going to go ahead and put a name for this. So this is my test resource group for the show. And we'll keep it as Central US. Again, we still have tags here that you can see, but we don't have to put anything in there. We're not for this case. So I'm going to go ahead and hit create. Again, validation passes because the underlying JSON that is going to deploy this looks good. And now the rules will take place, and I hit create. It's validating, and bang, we get the little warning error up top, right?
Yeah.
It says resource was disallowed by policy, and it tells us, basically that I need a resource name requires a specified tag on resource groups.
And that's as simple as to to do this stuff.
And that's it. So I'm still in the. It didn't wipe it out. I don't have to start from scratch. All I got to do now is go into tags. I can type in here and say owner. Select that tag. Put a value in here. In this case, I'll put my name.
That's where you get this drop down. Like it's going to give you a drop down of existing
name value
owners,
pairs. Yep.
But it's not restrictive to that. You can still type in whatever you want, right?
Exactly, right? So I could, all of those are here, but I could certainly add my own if I wanted to. Say foo.
Well, you're on the value.
Yeah.
The,
well, both. I could do a tag here.
Oh, yeah,
foo,
of course you could. Yeah, right.
And I could do bar, right?
Right.
And I've got a tag now that we can reuse. That'll be used across all of those. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to delete that one, and then we'll say review and create, validation passed, create, and my resource group was getting created in the background. Cool?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, right?
Not much to it.
And so, so some of those tags are just helpful, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But there's more that you can do, right? I think it's good to show that right off the bat.
Yeah. Maybe it's good to take a step back.
Yeah.
Because we've talked about a couple of things here. We've talked about subscriptions. We've talked about resource groups. We've talked about tags. How do all of these things relate, right? So what I'm going to do is go to the whiteboard here.
Okay.
I'm trying something new. So
this will be cool.
This will be fun.
Yeah, this will be cool.
So in our Azure environment, we have a subscription. And that subscription has a number of components associated with it. It has things like role-based access control, who has the ability to create items in there, all of the permissions that you need. But one of the things you can apply to it is you can apply a policy directly onto the subscription. And that's kind of what Andy did. That's what my policy did as well. It enacted on the subscription. But underneath that subscription, everything you create in Azure has to go into something called a resource group. So underneath your subscription, we have a resource group. Now, what we didn't do is we didn't define in our example, but you certainly can. You can define a policy that only takes effect on the resource group.
Right.
Okay. So now I've got a way of just having doling out policy down to that level. Okay. And then if this policy gets defined up here at the subscription, like this one here is, it automatically inherits down to the resource group and any of the other items that are in there.
Right.
As well.
So the resource group inherits from
anything above it.
Above it. Right. Yeah.
And then this is where, so most of us just have subscriptions in our, that you have a subscription that you worry about. You might have them all kind of at a flat hierarchy, if you will. You can put something in the middle to help define what properties should be in that subscription when you roll it out. And this goes again to a larger governance when you get to, more than just like the dozen or so people who might be in a group.
Right.
And you start having to manage across a larger organization. And that's when you can get into essentially creating what's called a managed, go back to the black pen, what's called a managed group. And what a managed, go ahead.
Yeah, no, these are great. This is really cool when it gets to the policy. Go ahead.
And a managed group gives you the ability to apply a number of things to subscriptions that get created now underneath it. When you first instantiate that, all of your subscriptions that you might have are still going to remain at that single flat hierarchy level. But now I've got a way to essentially create a hierarchy to put my subscriptions in. So I might have a managed group here, and managed group essentially manages not only things like policy, it manages that role-based access control.
Yep.
It also can manage something called blueprints.
Right.
And blueprints are a combination of policies, RBAC definitions, as well as some initial components you want to create in Azure. And you can use that blueprint to create or to be the foundation of your subscription when you create it out. We have a number of blueprints defined for various regulated industries, like for healthcare and financial services, and you can use those as starters, or you can create your own for your own organization. But the idea is that we have a managed group here. You might have, come back to here, you might have another managed group down here with a different set of policies, RBACs, and blueprints, and I'm going to go ahead and create a couple of subscriptions off of that. They will essentially inherit the policies and RBACs from here, which inherited the policies and RBACs from this parent group as well.
Yeah, the inheritance model is pretty cool. But so a use case for this, which what we do. Now I know there are organizations that have, I don't know, I shouldn't say hundreds, but there are organizations that have hundreds of subscriptions,
sure,
right? Or tens or hundreds or whatever. We have a handful of subscriptions, right? We anticipate having a couple more. What we like to do is, well, I guess you automatically get like a management group at like a top level, right? I forget. There's like
once you instantiate it, it's not instantiated by default.
It's important.
So once you do that, then you got a root and then a managed group hanging off of that.
Right. So what we did is we have so far 2 managed groups. We have one called production.
Okay.
We have one called non-production.
Makes sense.
Pretty simple. Now there's a lot of I could see plenty of reasons to do it otherwise, but what works for us, because we don't anticipate having hundreds of subs, right?
Sure.
Is that we'll have a couple of, and again, this really comes into play when you think about things like RBAC and policy.
Right.
I want to have certain policies that apply to all my production subscriptions, and I want to have different policies that apply to my non-production. Simple as that.
Absolutely.
And so that made it pretty easy for us if we want to stand up another subscription for any reason, and it's a quote dev subscription or something like that. Just throw it in that group. Done. Policies applied, right? So.
And what's great, not only policy, but we haven't talked in great detail about it, but the role-based access control is very important. When you define that as at the subscription level, or your managed group level, it gets inherited into the subscription, and once it's there, you can't change those. So the owner of that subscription is always going to be the owner not only of the subscription, but all of the artifacts that get created inside of that subscription. So you think about the way you split things out, your production environment and your development and test environment, your dev tests, people are going to have ownership potentially in that subscription because they're creating artifacts, they're doing their active build. Your production resources, you're probably going to have your IT folks who maintain your production environment. They're going to be the owners of that. Your devs may still have read access into that subscription to understand how are things configured, what's in there, are there problems, and read just gives them access to see it, doesn't give them access to certain secrets or keys to the kingdom, if you will, in that environment. So
you can use that role-based RBAC at the managed group, and then it applies to subscriptions, and the whole thing kind of comes together pretty nicely, right? Yeah. And it's one of these, I find it, the downside, I think it's important, right? I wanted to do this show about policy because I think most people don't even think about it, right? But I will say that it's another example of, like, as great as Azure is, it's a universe. There's so much going on in Azure, right? Chris, I don't know if you are starting to look into Azure stuff, but like, I know you are, like, we talk about it, but like at work, right?
Yeah, I hadn't heard of Azure Policy until this week when we said, hey, let's do a show on Azure Policy.
Yeah.
And I went, oh, I mean, I don't think I was naive enough to think there wasn't some way to manage a large organization. But if you're a developer that's just, you're fortunate enough, whether you're using the free trial or maybe you're fortunate enough to have access to some credits that you might use every month, you don't see this behind the scenes thing because it's just your sub. So you just slap resources down there, and what kind of management do you need?
You don't, right? But then you get into the real world, and it's a mess.
Right. And just watching you folks do this, a lot of questions started coming to mind are there guides on practices for naming these resources and tagging them, and then of course, and that has nothing to do with policy. It's like, wow, there's
just a guide for naming them. Right.
There's like a whole other show on that, and then I saw the managed identity stuff and thought, right, when it's my subscription, I don't think about any of that because I'm in charge of it all. But in the real world, you do need these non-person identities that survive whether people transfer, change roles, whatever. And just watching you flow through it, I said, I've never touched any of this stuff.
Yeah. So the thing I'm saying in this case is that if you're whatever your role is at work and you're thinking about, like, hey, I want to bring our organization onto Azure, there's a lot to think about. It shouldn't be. I mean, I want to encourage people, as I'm sure you do. We want to encourage people to use Azure. I think it's great.
It's very easy to get started, but you want to make sure that soon on, you get those guardrails and those things in place so that you don't wind up, with a big bill at the end of the month.
Right. Because
and there are other things that, and there's a whole separate show or topic we can talk about when we around budgets and costs that you can look at to set alerts, which is the important part when your subscription starts to hit certain milestones. If you want to cap what's going on in your subscription, right?
Yeah. So it's powerful. What do we want to do next? Do we feel we've explained that management group stuff enough, right?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, the inheritance part is pretty cool. That hierarchy you have for managed groups can be about, I think the limit is like 6 layers deep. Right. If I recall correctly, the number of managed groups you can have all up is somewhere around 10,000 across those different hierarchies.
Right.
The idea is you can make things very complex to meet different business needs you have, but they could be just as simple as what you have in your case, prod dev, and that's it.
Prod dev, right. So another example of something with policy that we talked about is I'm trying to get a naming convention enforced.
Which is really cool, right?
It's pretty cool. So I guess first it's worth explaining what the naming convention is.
Yeah.
That we use.
Okay.
Only for the sake of this. This could be a show, like Chris said, naming conventions could be a show, right? But
everybody has their own
whiteboard. Yeah. And you could write it out and show, So what we say is that every resource should have, they're made up of, they're kind of made up of 4 parts, but we're going to say 3 for now, and I'm going to come back to the 4th part. So the first part is the name of the resource, right? So if we're creating the Dev Talk Show's website, the name of the resource might be called, TDTS website.
App service.
Yeah. No, I would call it
You would call it website?
Yeah, like website or something like that, right?
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't, call it whatever you want, but whatever the resource is called, right?
Yep.
Then we use a hyphen, a dash, and the second thing we put in is the type of resource, right?
Okay.
And so we would say, in this case, SVC is what we use for service. It's a service,
All
okay?
right.
And so that's why I don't know if maybe it wouldn't even have the word website at the beginning. Maybe it would be TDTS.
And then service.
And it would be just service. It really depends on how complex things get, right?
I'm going to get fancy watch this. Here we go.
Oh, look at you. Yeah, you're a whiteboard user, right? Look at that. That's impressive. You got some skills.
Oh, there's a shout out to Jess Chadwick there because he and I worked on a whiteboard and dreamed of
doing those kind of things.
Yeah, I remember you guys talked about
we
that.
implemented that. We implemented the capture and move.
Oh, wow.
This was years ago, and it was before the age of pens, and we were early. We were
That's all right.
So the third thing we put in is the environment. Now, I know that's going to sound redundant because we have a tag for environment.
Right.
But there are times, in my experience, when the tag is really helpful, and there's times where I just want to see it in the name and know that this is a resource that is in a certain environment. Now, this is just personal choice, right?
Yeah.
So there's any way you want to do it.
Yep.
But this is basically what we came up with is these 3 parts, right? The name of the resource, the type of the resource, and the environment.
Okay.
And by the way, I enforce the word. Some people say, "Oh, well, then in your production subscription, you don't need that." And I say, "No, I want to have prod because there are going to be non-prod things in our production subscription, such as staging or faux prod. You can see examples where you'd still have different things in prod than real prod.
Gotcha.
Anyway, that's what we came up with. So then I started thinking, well, how in the world are we going to enforce that?
Right. That's the tricky bit.
And it took a while to kind of play with this. I mean, not weeks or anything, but it took a little while. And so I think I have them over here in OneNote. In VS Code. I have these policies. Now I don't have everything, all of it here.
Okay.
Right? But what I have here, and I can do the same. Let's see. Actually, with code, I can just make it bigger. Okay. Or does Windows Plus work in here? I guess it'll.
Yeah.
The Control Plus.
No, the Control Plus. I mean, yeah, right. Oh, I hit that thing. Oh my God, what did I do? Okay. Close that magnifier. Yeah. I don't usually use Control Plus, but there we go. So what I've got here is so we want to have environment suffixes. We know that, right? So I created a definition, and it's called environment suffix for non-production.
Okay.
And in here, now this is the whole thing, but really the rule is right here where it says policy rule. And it says, and this is kind of complicated because you have to build up these if, and there's not every, this isn't C#. right? So you don't have every option in your mind that you could create, like, oh, I'm going to build a rule that says this or that and this, when that, it's somewhat limited.
Okay.
But basically what you can see is these are the non-prod suffixes we allow. We allow systest, QA, QA1, QA2, QA3. I just kind of threw those in as examples. I don't know. I got to kind of come up with. Usually we just use QA, but there's certain teams that have multiple QAs, so I kind of threw that in there.
Okay.
Then we could have a UAT. I came up with this at the end of a shared, because sometimes resources, for whatever reason, might be used across, like QA and UAT might be using the same resource or something like that. So this was just our ideas, right? Dev has its own sort of connotation. I don't want to get into everything, but the point is we've got these suffixes, right?
Which is pretty cool, yeah.
And so we're using a like. So I'm saying the field the field name is, policy knows what name is. Name is the name of the resource. Like I didn't have to teach it that. Name is like
it's a
thing it understands. Yeah. And then we use wildcard. So this is basically saying it has to end in one of these things, right? Now, it could be any of these. And the rule says if it's not any of these, then it's going to fail.
Okay.
Right? It has to be one of these things. And then I ran into another problem. Okay? I don't know if you noticed it at the bottom, but you might run into these quirks, which is to say that you can't do that in a storage account. Storage accounts have their own naming rules, and you can't put a hyphen. It's not an allowed character.
Right. Same with capitals.
Same with capitals, right? But, so what I did is, what the rule pretty much says is, fail if this resource is not a storage account, or doesn't end in fo, or doesn't end in dev, or doesn't end in shared, or doesn't end in UAT, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the rule.
Gotcha.
And I know there's going to be more things that I'm probably going to have to add in, like storage account, that maybe we haven't gotten into yet. As a matter of fact, we think we found one. Well, whatever it is, So okay, so that's the rule. Okay, and then the effect is deny. I can call it audit if I want.
Sure.
Right, but sorry, audit. But I'm saying deny. Okay, and the other attributes that you see on here aren't really part of the rule. I think these. So here's how I would do. I'm going to put this into my subscription.
Okay.
Right? So if I go into this sub and I go to definitions, I want to create a new policy definition.
Okay.
And initiatives is something we want to come back to, right?
We do.
We didn't talk
about that at all. Yeah.
But we'll start with a policy definition. And again, I can choose the location. Now, since this is naming conventions for non-production subscriptions, at work, in this list shows I would get a choice of my management groups. Right?
Yep.
But I don't have those in this in this thing, right? But I would see that. In this case, I'm going to put it right into my subscription, and I'm going to, I have to say select to that, and then I got to give it a name, and I'm going to call it, what do I call it? Resource names for non-prod. Something like that, okay? And the description is, these are the allowed values, something like that. Okay? Now, categories I haven't played much with, but I think there's some, I guess you can choose these different things, and I think there's one like called other. Because you have to have a category. I thought there was like an other or something like that.
A category for where your policy definition falls into?
I guess this is like the type of policy that I'm creating. Is it a policy for key vaults? Is it a policy for compute? Is it a policy for app servers? I think there's one that's like general or something like that, or resource. Yeah, I didn't see it. I could have sworn. Oh, general. Sorry, I'm just going to use general for now.
Because it's everything you're in your
It's really for everything, right?
Yeah.
Now, when I go down here, you can see that there is a policy in here that is just saying, it just shows the policy rule and the mode.
It's a template. It's showing you what the, your custom policy should look like.
So in this case, I'm going to go over to what I had over
Back
here.
to code. Yep.
And I'm going to take the policy rule, and I should be able to collapse this. And, I guess I can't do that. And try to I should be able to do this, right? Does that give me the whole thing?
I want to go down to 61.
Yeah, Okay, that's what I wanted to. Thank you. So I've got the that's inside, and then there's the deny, and I think the deny is already there. Yeah, it says audit, but that's okay. So I'm going to basically just replace
down to the comma,
and put in my thing, right? And I'm going to change it to, sorry, my screen. No, something's not right. I think I put it in the wrong spot. Darn it.
Control Z?
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Maybe I needed the comma.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah, down to the comma is what you said. Yeah, okay. So, and I'm going to say deny. I'm a hard ass about this stuff. Can I say that on family friendly? Yeah. Now, so, and then there's these parameters. Now, there are no parameters for this.
Right. Because it just has to happen.
Right. So if this was the tags example, the parameter would be like the name of the tag, right? In the example we just showed. So I'm not positive, but I think I can just get rid of that whole parameters attribute. I don't see it in this, so I think I can just get rid of it. I don't do this all that often, but I think I can just go from here to here. Okay? And I save it. Now, hopefully that's working, because it's just gone. It's just grayed out. So I think that means it worked.
Yeah.
Oh, my name went away. How did my name get away? Did I hit? I must have hit a back button or something like that. Name's giving me my name. Isn't that great? What I called it resource. No, environment suffixes for non-prod. Okay, and I'm not going to put in a thing, and I'll just try that again. I don't know how that happened, huh? Maybe when I hit Control Z?
Could be.
Okay.
Yep.
So it created the policy. So now, over here in definitions, if I go to all types and I say I want to look at only custom, I can see that custom type that I created. The next step, though, is, again, just like tags, it's not applied yet. I haven't assigned that to anything. Right? So now I want to go over to assignments, and I want to assign that. And it's really just like we did before. I want to assign a policy. Again, I can scope it. In this case, I don't have a whole lot of choices. I only have a subscription here, but I can scope it to resource groups, or I can scope it higher at the management group level. No exclusions. The policy definition now, when I come over here, I can filter these different types, but in my case, it's the first one that shows up on a list, but if I wanted to, I can just say, show me my custom ones. Choose that, and select it, and I can put a description in there, but at the end of the day, there's no parameters to do, there's nothing like that. And now, hopefully it works, and it does. We know it's going to take a little while for it to propagate, because we kind of got into that before.
But we can kind of think about what we've done so far is we've taken policies that are already present in the subscription and enabled them, assigned them essentially to the subscription. We've taken a custom policy that you created, defined that new policy based on that custom policy definition, and also assigned that to a subscription. So we've taken a couple policies and individually assigned them. What if we wanted to have a bunch of policies and assign them all at once and kind of track and monitor them all at once?
I would enjoy that.
So that's where we start getting into something called an initiative.
Oh yeah, my screen's not up. But yeah, right over here there's this initiative. Doesn't really matter, but this is initiatives, right? It's another. Initiatives are like it's like a bucket, right?
It's like policies that are related that you want to see get enacted and potentially tracked, all at the same within the same at the same time, right?
And I believe from a reporting perspective, you can sort of group them up, so you can have initiatives that like sort of make sense, right?
Exactly.
So we looked at, and I don't know what you recommend to people, but as I started learning about initiatives, like a few things, again, it was one of these things that's in the back of my head. I'm like, what kind of initiatives do I want, right? And the first thing I thought of, like the kind of stuff we're doing today, these are standards, right? Tags, naming convention. And by the way, there's more to the naming convention. I have another way of getting the part that's in the middle. But that's another thing. I just wanted to show you, say that doesn't solve the whole naming convention thing. But So I'm calling them standards, right? The standards that we want to enforce would be an initiative.
Yes.
Right?
So you could have, your 3 or 4 policies, or how many policies it is around standards, push that out there, and then you can see from a compliance perspective, because we can go to the overview section on the policy, right?
Oh yeah, this will be fun from like crazy. Nothing is compliant right now, right?
It's the Wild Wild West. It's our dev subscription, right? So we have that going on for us. But this would be where you could see the overall compliance of your subscription. Your auditors or your IT professionals can look at this and say, hey, we're 90% compliant, and here are the ones that are a problem. We can go drill into those and see what actual resources are not compliant and do something to remediate those, all from within this portal view here.
Yeah, and if we look over here, we can see that I am 100% compliant on my one I just created.
Yeah.
But then if you look at the fine print, it says, oh yeah, but it hasn't started yet.
So everybody starts out 100%.
So nice, but not going to get me there, right?
Yep.
It's not compliant.
But what's cool, so you don't have, so you just have, they're all individual policies, right?
Yeah, but this one should say, 0% compliance. So here it does show, I created these tag rules.
Right.
And nothing has those tags. Right?
Right.
Because I didn't create any. Now, if I created something with a tag, and maybe we could do that real quick, I would see that this compliance would change.
Right.
Maybe as we're talking, I'll go in and create a resource with the tag. There was something I wanted to point out, a gotcha on this.
Okay.
Which is kind of unfortunate. I think my guess is the short-term problem.
Okay.
But we created rules for tags. And if I go to certain things, like if I go back to my resource groups, and I want to create a new resource group, the first thing we'll see in here is that there's this category for tags where I can actually assign these tags in the creation process.
Right.
But not every resource, when you hit create in the Azure portal, has a place to enter tags.
On the creation side. Yes.
On the creation side. And what we're seeing, and what I've seen, is that more and more of them, I think this is sort of like a new UI in the Azure portal, and we all know the Azure portal changes like weekly. And so more and more things are getting this like tag box. Not everything has it.
Right.
The problem with that is I have a policy that says you can't create a resource if it doesn't have a tag. And so guess what happens?
So what resource might be one?
I'm trying to remember one. But I've run into it a few times, so I'm going to see if I can get lucky and remember that maybe it's, I think functions have it now. I don't, honestly, I could go looking like crazy and I wouldn't find it. But the workaround is that we use ARM templates to create our resources anyway. And in ARM templates, you can put the tags in there. So like that's a whole other show, ARM templates, right? But it is a gotcha that if you get in, you could get yourself into a little bit of trouble. There's always a workaround, but you can't use the UI for some of these things.
So it's not web apps, because they just looked, web apps has tags.
No, but I will tell you, there's 2 ways to create a function. I don't know if you know, right? Do you know what I'm talking about? There's 2 ways to create a function. One is to go to functions and create a function. And there's another one I think that says I want to create an app service as a function. Something like that, and that way it doesn't give you the opportunity to create tags.
Okay. Let's try. I see what you're saying.
So if I go to like web app, maybe it's this one. I go to web app and I do create. Let's see if there's a. I thought there's a way somewhere to say I want this to be a function.
So yeah.
In here. Is it in here? No. It's not this.
No. So a function app, it gives you that same UI pretty much you have on the web app, where it has a space for tags.
Classic.
I think you go to app service and then you pick function app, right? Because there's web apps, mobile apps, API.
Yeah, where's that? So you go to app service, you're saying?
Well,
app service.
We'll find out.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how to do this. I mean, this isn't really super.
Right, because under the covers, a function is nothing is analogous to a web job, and it runs in the app service, right? So
Where's
if I
that
do,
thing where you can choose whether you want it to be a function or not? I can't find it. Maybe they changed it already. It could be gone for all I know. That you can only create a function in the function spot.
yeah.
I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I can tell you that it happens.
Okay.
Right? It's happening less and less because they're upgrading the UI. I wanted to get to that gotcha. I want to get back to the show. Like now back to our regularly scheduled programming. But before we go back,
Right.
if you're watching, do us a favor and do what?
Comment?
Subscribe, like,
Yep.
comment on the show.
Mm-hmm.
We want that. We would love to have your participation. We'd love you to tune in live. If you're watching the show after the fact on the YouTube archive, remember that Wednesday nights at about 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, whatever it's daylight savings or depending on.
Just for this show, and then we're going back.
Right. So that gets confusing, but just Eastern time.
Give or take how long it takes us to run through the trial.
Right, sometimes we're a couple minutes late. Tune in because we'd love to have you join us and leave a comment. We've had some shows that have been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
When we promote it well. This show we didn't promote so well, and so sometimes we do it and sometimes we don't. But we're looking to build an audience. So be with us on this show. And at the same time, if you're watching this after the fact, subscribe to our channel, please. Like it if you like it. And leave us a comment.
Yeah, well, I mean, if there's other things you want to know about policy or even other topics, it's probably a great idea to let us know in the comments, and that'll certainly probably show up on our show schedule.
Yeah. And maybe one day we'll do a show, like it's not even a whole show, but maybe we'll do a show of like going back and answering questions. Like we're going to come back and show 10 minutes of this question, 10 minutes on another question. Like, we can do whatever we want. We are the bosses of the show, right? So if we want to do that, we can.
Exactly.
All right.
So where were we before I drove us off of?
Well, previously you were going to show us how you can create a function at another place, but I think
that was
the three of us.
Yeah,
we're not sure if that's it.
We were talking about
what I was just interested in is, so we saw that you could use policy. I'm watching this, and is it only related to how you set up your resources? Would it be a different feature of Azure to determine who can do things?
That's our back, right?
When you, as far as who can create objects in Azure,
right? Like, in an organization, I have the power to do certain things. Perhaps is that not related to policy?
It's a great. So that's a great question. So if you think about the controls you have in your Azure subscription, there are two components. One is the thing we talked about here with policy. And think of policy as the what's that you can create or the what's that you're allowed to do in your environment. Even if it's to say, hey, create a virtual machine, but I'm only allowed to create the A series virtual machines because they're less expensive. Doesn't mean that's different from who can create those resources, right? So from the role-based access control, the RBAC side of things, I might have the capabilities in that subscription to create a virtual machine, but policy limits me on what type of virtual machine I can implement in that environment.
Yeah, so what would be interesting is if we could combine those and say that this policy applies to this set of users, RBAC type of thing, this group, and this policy applies to a different set, right?
And that's where managed group comes in. Either managed groups, right? Because you've got policy and RBAC all inside of a managed group, or a blueprint.
Well, but that would still limit it to the subscription. So I might say in a given subscription, if you come into that subscription, Rich, you know more than I do. You're allowed to create network stuff in that subscription. But I'm not allowed to in that subscription.
But that's permissions. Who can do those things?
Okay. All right. So let's take it. Yeah, I said that wrong, right? So let's do a different one. You have authority. You own the checkbook at work.
Okay.
So you're allowed to create the really expensive VMs in our subscription, but I'm only allowed to create the cheap VMs in our subscription.
Right. So what you could do is have a policy not at the subscription level, but at the resource group level. And you have permissions. You have what's called the virtual the virtual machine creator. In that resource group. We both have access to that role, virtual machine creator. But you only have it on that resource group, and I only have it on this resource group, and the policies are different between the two.
Yeah.
So you could do it.
Yeah, there's a way to do something like that, depending on how you use resource groups, which is a whole other.
So you're saying combine the two features, and you can get to the same place. Where I think what Andy's saying is, it would almost be nice to see the integration as a first-class citizen in some cases.
Right. Like in that exclusions thing, wouldn't it be cool if there was a group? You could say, like, exclude this group.
You can.
You can.
You could say exclude a resource group.
No, not the resource group. I'm
sorry.
our back group. Like, sorry, like AD group or something like that. And again, this is just ideas. I mean,
sure.
You know,
We're taking an already complicated.
It's complicated. It's really complicated.
We're trying to come up. We're deliberately, I think, stretching the bounds only because partially we just have Rich here and we said, hey, you showed us some cool stuff. So now I'm going to ask for more.
Yeah, right.
I'm not 100% sure if you'd almost be doing yourself a disservice to make it too complicated, but you know, some large organizations out there that you can imagine.
I can't even imagine like how many rules they must have, how many subscriptions they must have, what their RBAC looks like. I mean, really, right? It's complicated. Yeah, it's complicated. So we were talking about initiatives, though. I think, weren't we?
We started down that path.
Right.
So you have a couple of those policies that are enacted essentially in your, or they're assigned to your subscription. We could take those policies and create an initiative and put those policies in that initiative and assign that initiative.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Okay. So to do that, and I think I played with this once, but I don't really know it. So I think it's under a definition, right? It's called a definition, and I believe you go to new initiative definition.
Yes.
Right. So, of course it's going to be in my subscription, and that's fine. I like this idea. Like, why don't we call it what I was saying before, like standards? Initiative.
I think it's fair.
You know, standards. Okay. I'm not going to put a description in there now, right? In the category, again, we have to use one. I'm just going to go under general.
Okay.
Because I believe it's required to have a thing. So, I got that far.
Right.
So now what do I do?
So now on the right side there, we have all of the definitions that are available in your subscription. So you could
do custom.
So you could take that custom one and you can drag that one over.
Drag it over.
Well, I'm sorry, hit the plus sign.
Plus sign. Oh, sorry. Did it go? I think it must have gone because it's not. What I do? I mess something up when I drag. I see. This is the initiative definition. Standards. Wait, what happened? It was there?
Yeah.
And then it wasn't. Let's just do it again. I did something funky, I think. Let's see if I can change it like that. Yep, the plus signs are back, right? The plus sign was there, and it's not. You saw it, right?
I did.
I wonder if it's...
Oh, there you go. So it's...
Oh, it's right. It's so
there
small.
You go.
Yeah, right here. Environments. Oh, I was expecting it to be somehow down here.
So yeah, so you can read it from there if you want.
Yeah, here it is.
And it tells you it's a custom definition.
Right.
So now we can throw a built-in one too. Now, the guidance is, even if you're deploying one policy, put it inside of an initiative so that if you do have other definitions that might be related in the future, you may only have one standard to start out with. Let's go ahead and put that in an initiative, and then as more standards become defined, the idea being is that you're not going to put all of the controls in place at once because you may not know them all, and you're going to build them up over time. So this gives you that framework to do that.
And there's so many things in here that are like built in. Audit VMs that do not use managed disks, right?
Yeah.
Cores should not allow every resource to access your function apps. So I've been working on cores all week, by the way.
Okay.
Well, all week. Today's Wednesday, but
it's okay.
That's cool that you can put a policy like. So think about that, right? Because we started the show off, and I'm saying like, policy is cool. Trust me, right?
Policy is important.
It really is important. And so something like that. So imagine a scenario. You don't want to have all your sites allow cross-origin requests. Or whatever they're called, right? Cross-origin requests? Yeah. Right. So there it is. You can put a policy in there that says that all of our all of our web apps have to have like a course policy on them or something.
Absolutely.
Like that. So this, there's a lot of good. I mean, I'm scrolling like this scroll bar goes far.
The granularity of this is crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, how and these are just it says, are these predefined?
Yeah, these are predefined.
So the one there, like if we were just talking about the cores one where it says, okay, you shouldn't allow all. Would you be able to create a policy to say you should allow these 5? Or am I, again, is this where I'm trying to stretch it?
You're trying to...
Point, okay.
Well, I was going to say, I wonder if we can look at the definition of it, and we could probably build our own, cheat off it a little bit or something. But I don't know.
Right, and I think if you think about what this is looking at, if I understand the rule correctly, it is looking at your function apps and saying they're too wide open.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can define the whitelisting or the thing that you want to
I suppose that would
in
be
the function app itself, right?
Yeah, right. That's true. Yeah.
Because what do we typically do when we're dabbing? We don't know where all the URLs are. We just do star, right? And say allow everything.
This certainly prevents that bar from, because, okay, so you're a developer, you just want to get it working, you use star, and then you never go back.
Exactly. And it may not prevent, even though it's a deny and you get a warning about it, but in that policy checklist or the list of policies that are out of compliance, that one's going to show up and someone's going to look at it and say, well, which apps are these? I can drill into it and say, oh, well, make sure we do the fixes up before we move on with the app.
I was looking at on the list here, require specified tag. Now, we applied that. I'm curious to see how it works now, because it's going to have parameters. Our other one didn't have parameters.
So let's go ahead and click, see if we can add that.
So let's add that.
And then definition, right?
Well, this shows the definition of it.
Okay.
Okay, and it shows that it has parameters, the tag name.
Yep.
Okay, so if I add it, so I'm guessing
well, there you go.
that we're going to say that I want to do the tag name. Look, use initiative parameter. That's interesting. I don't even know what that is, but let's just say I want to have an owner tag, right? Owner. Now, I'm guessing this. So how does this apply? How does it know that this, so a required specified tag is built in. Now, if I want to do another one, I think I have to add it again. See that? And now I'm going to say we're going to require the environment, right? This is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, I'm doing this for the first time, but I can assume what this means is that. Now, the only thing I guess I don't like about this, honestly, and it's probably pretty hard on the stream as well, is that it's kind of hard to see. Let's see. Wait, let's do this here. Let's
see what windows it zoom.
Yeah. How do I want to? I didn't zoom to my right spot here. Sorry.
We don't have Zoom It installed on your machine.
No, I do have Zoom It, but I didn't turn it on, and I wish I did. Yeah. Oh, I hit the wrong button again. All right. There we go. Now it's doing it. So this is kind of hard to read, I think.
It's gotten better now that you zoomed in.
Now that I zoomed in, right? Okay. Environment suffixes, that's applied.
Yeah.
Require specific tag. I can delete it. Here's the parameters for its specific parameter. Here's the next one. But when you look at it in this level here, it's a little hard to read. And so
there's a lot of information that we're trying to push into there, right? And you may not be doing it this way because you can do it with JSON templates.
Yeah, that's right.
We have it, when you do it that way, it's then stored in code.
Right.
We can then go ahead and push it into Azure DevOps and have it deploy as part of the pipeline to create your environment, so it gets from dev to stage to prod in the right manner, and you don't have to worry about doing these manually.
Right. So I'm going to hit save, because I don't think we need to do anything else in this case, right? So could not save standards, please try again. Later. Please try again later.
It's later.
It's later. I'm just looking to see, what did it say? I was trying to read it. Request resource was disallowed by policy. So, here's an interesting thing. I believe
it's because you put your other policy in there, right?
No, the environment suffix, its thing doesn't have a name that ends in this. So that's one of those ones I said before. So we have now initiatives fall into the policy.
Yeah.
And the policy that we put in is blocking this initiative because it doesn't end in prod, right?
Or whatever.
Like that. Now let's see if that fixes it.
Okay.
But what did I say before? There is no place in this UI to add tags. So the tagging one might fail. I know what I didn't do. There is, now I remember something. Hang on, let's see if this works. No, same thing probably. Environment suffixes for this is non-prod. Okay, hang on. Let's call it sys test. Okay, let's see if this one works. There's another attribute. Yep. It's not allowing it. Well, we can go remove that other thing. But there's something else I found when I was working on this stuff.
Okay. So what you did there would have worked if you didn't have a policy already in place preventing that naming convention from happening.
Right, so I don't know how to remove these things. I guess
I really think magnifier is part of the issue, and I want to apologize to Mark Rusinovich for not having used Zoom It there and for using magnifier. I'm sure that's part of the issue here.
It is a confounding component of it, I'm sure.
What happened now? Now I'm all messed up.
We're just stalling for Andy on that one.
I'm going to delete it.
Go for it, yeah.
We don't really need it. Delete that. delete that. And again, we didn't totally script this. That's the nature of the show. Is we try things to see how it might work in the real world, right? Like,
we mess up so you don't have to.
But there is something else, and I want to see if it goes under assignments. I want to jump to this real quick. There is something in the policy. Maybe it's at the policy level. So I'm going to go back to the. I'm going to create a definition and see if it shows up in here, and I will show you this. When you go to in here, mode all. See that? Mode all?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there is another option for that, and I'm tempted to just Google it because I don't remember what it is. So apparently there are, I think there's only 2 options for this. Do you know about this? Are you familiar with this? We can, I think one is called indexed and one is all. Are you looking at it now?
I had that page up when I did not search for it, I had it up already.
You had it up already. So I was right, I'm looking at your screen, indexed. I got it right, I'm psyched that I got it right.
Yeah.
So it might be that we only want to put this on indexed things.
Which means only evaluate resource types that support tags and location.
Right, so certainly tags should be on index. Now, maybe tagging already was. Our environment thing that I created, I probably also should have said, our naming convention.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I found that sometimes reducing it to that indexed solves some of those problems and doesn't apply it to like the really weird stuff. Because what this shows us is that all these things are considered resources. So a policy is a resource.
Sure.
And that's just, a little mind-boggling, right?
I get what you're saying, yes.
I mean, it's cool, but it's like one of those like,
you don't think of it that way.
wrapped in a riddle or whatever. It's like, wow, I can apply a policy to a resource, but a policy is a resource. Because Azure, everything's a resource. Like
exactly. Right? Which means everything goes in a resource group.
Right. So, anyway, I'm glad we came back to that mode attribute that we should have set in here. And if I look over in my naming conventions, mode, see that? I have it there. Mode is indexed. Now, when I only copied, remember the part I copied was the rule.
Just the rule. That's
right?
it.
And you can't really copy this whole thing in. If you do, it'll mess it up because that's
they're
not
different.
right. Yeah, they're different sections of
GUIDs and things.
So, and I don't want this stuff going in, right?
Yep.
But mode I have is indexed.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably have that for all these. And so I suspect that was part of the problem.
I think so.
But in any case, we're going to go back and do we want to still try to create this initiative definition?
Let's give it one more shot because we're getting kind of low on time here.
I'll run through it real quick. I'm going to call it standards. And I'm going to use an existing thing here. And we go to general. And we're going to say we want to add this one. We're going to want to add a tag. And we'll add a tag. No, not add a tag. Require a tag. Different rule, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll only do one of them for now. So let's say we want to
we
have
get the
a
idea.
tag. Yep. And
because there was nothing wrong with the multiple ones we did before.
Right. And it's saved.
There you go.
Which is great.
So it saved that initiative definition.
Correct.
So much like we had a policy definition,
Yep.
we have when we had that policy definition, we had to assign that definition to something, a subscription, a resource group, what have you. Now we have an initiative definition, so we got to do the next best thing, or the next thing in that process, which is assign that initiative to either subscription or resource group.
So we can switch back to my screen, and Chris, while Rich was talking right there, because we know Mark Rasinovich usually watches the show.
He's a big fan.
Does not well, I can't imagine that he watches the show. But I'm a fan of Zoom It, and
as we all are.
So I went in and it's funny on my checklist when I do talks at groups and stuff.
Yeah,
it's always on my checklist before I start up Zoom In.
Right.
I wish it was like on by default. I wonder if there's a way to turn Zoom In on by default.
There is. You can just load it as part of your startup. Yeah. The problem is though the same commands by default are the same commands that work in what is Outlook? Control 1, Control 2, Control 3.
So you get in trouble.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. So
I
anyway,
stop using Outlook, right? I mean, that's
one example. Yeah, that's one possible solution.
So what do I do now? I want to assign this initiative.
Yep. So much like we assigned definition. Yep.
Okay. And assign the initiative. I'm guessing this is going to be exactly the same.
Yeah.
My scope is already set. No exclusions. The initiative definition I have to choose from here. And I'll choose our standards.
There you go. It's already right there for you. And I'm sure if you went to the drop down there for type, you would get for the custom, and it would just be, yep.
And I can search. And that's it.
That's it, because all of the information is inside the initiative definition. It's just a matter of applying it.
And review and create. Now here I can create. Oh no, that's something different. It's just parameters.
But we don't have any.
Not right because they're built in.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Review and create. That's cool. And I create, and it is now applied.
Right. And what's cool is you can see inside of there, right? We've got 2 policies inside of your initiative, and as we drill into that, we can see.
What can we see? It's probably, sometimes it pops up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought that actually looks tricky into the definition as opposed to the underlying. Yeah, it's okay. I was thinking it was going to take you into.
I thought it was going to take me into the. Maybe I clicked the wrong thing.
No.
Interesting.
Okay.
Remediation.
Well, that's the.
Yeah, you're right. This is the whole. So there is one thing I do know, and I'm sure you know this, is there's a compliance section.
Right.
Maybe that's where we could look at.
Right. I think that's what I'm thinking. There you go.
Standards,
that's
right?
it. Yep.
Now, of course, it hasn't started yet. We know that.
But
if I click in here. I bet this is what you were expecting.
That's what I was thinking of. Yeah. So you've got your 2 policies there, policy definitions that are part of your initiative.
Right. So what I was thinking for initiatives, in my organization, and maybe these are good initiatives, maybe they're not. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. Is that I want to do this initiative for standards. I wanted to do an initiative for security.
Okay.
So maybe like that cores thing that we saw would be something that goes into security. And then the cool thing about that is who would look at the compliance for that, since they're by initiatives, our security people would focus on that initiative. They could come here, they could build it, they could come in here and they can view it, right? And I was thinking about another initiative for cost.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe like we don't allow certain things created at a like the highest level of certain resources from a cost perspective. We, but there's always exceptions to those rules. But,
right, and that may be where you get to all of the, the resource groups that 90% of your developers have access to are the ones where that policy lives. There's that one resource group where that policy doesn't live on, it's excluded from it, and that's where you got 1 or 2 devs who have permissions to, because of their roles in the organization, has permissions to create those higher level machines. But they've got a justified use case around it.
Or the other thing is we use the audit instead of the deny. And then someone can come into this thing and look through the audit thing and say, oh, that's interesting. This is created at a higher level. It got flagged for audit. This is an expensive resource. It got flagged for audit. I'm going to look through there and go, yeah, that one's okay. Rich is allowed. Andy's not allowed, but Rich is allowed. And they saw that he created. Something like that.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that works. I think the other thing that's related to that is the cost side of things, right? Having, for us over the course of a month, there's a certain limit that we've got to keep our subscription under. And I've got a 25, 50%, 75, 90% flags and all of that. So as we hit those milestones, I essentially get an alert to me saying, hey, we just hit 25%, we just hit 50%. And depending on where we are in the month, if it's the beginning of the month, I may get concerned. If it's the end of the month, I'm like, okay, we're right on target for where we should be. But it gives us a sense of what those cost containment things could be. Because if someone does all of a sudden spin up that $10,000 a month VM, you're going to know about it, very quickly, because you're going to all of a sudden hit your $25 cap, and you can go back in and see, well, what's pushed us so far over that.
Now, the cap you're talking about,
cost containment.
That cost containment, I just want to ask this question. I think I know the answer, but I'm not going to find that. That's not part of the policy. Right? I don't want to confuse people.
Yep.
That's a different feature.
It's something in governance.
In governance,
right. So if you were to go to your subscription.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, this is your MSDN, so cost should be pretty.
Yeah, I'm thinking about 150. I love.
You don't spin up any HBs with 60.
Where do I go?
Actually, just say cost.
60 vCPUs.
Okay. Yeah, I don't do this a lot.
Cost management. Yep.
Now I have. I was kind of hoping it was going to mask that because I have Azure Mask on, but it's okay. Cost management, maybe it's in here.
You could do the budgets, the third one down there in the cost management section, and you can say what our budget is going to be. So you can add
Yes, wow. Here's a whole show on budgets.
Yeah, I've used this.
You've used this?
Yeah.
It's pretty cool, right?
Well, I mean, I haven't used it on as grand a scale, but I've used it on the am I going to go over my credits?
Yeah.
Oh, see, I don't do that. So I just wait, and the thing, you
get the email that says you don't work.
It's happened because I created like Cosmos DB once that was running me like it was costed a lot, and I was going to delete it, and actually I didn't even know, and that's where I learned some other tricks, which is to use ARM templates and then destroy things immediately because you can open them up. Again, there's shows about all these things. And I don't know how far we want to go down budget, but this is another thing that I didn't even know about. And I just learned something on the show.
So that might be something we'll talk about in a future show, but it certainly is. Cost containment is a big topic of discussion, right? When you start spinning up your subscription. So knowing that these tools exist and that you can put at least the warning flags in place and get alerts around that is really important.
Hey, so if you're watching the show and you just learned something new like I did, that's a good opportunity to hit the thumbs up,
subscribe,
right?
yeah.
Subscribe and like. I'm trying to. I said this before. I said this to Rich, I think, last time. You watch streams, whether they're, like, and these guys are always like, and hey, let's take a minute out and talk about hitting that like button.
You gotta get the hand over. Hit the subscribe button.
Yeah, right.
Hit the bell so you get notified, and you'll hear. You'll get all these little nuggets as soon as they come out, right?
Yeah, right. You'll hear about these things as they come out. Yeah, exactly.
You're watching on Twitch or Mixer, follow the channel.
That's right.
Notified when we go live, right?
That's follow button's right down there.
Live
right down there. Where is it?
It's there.
Right there. Who knows it, but it's
live Wednesdays at 8:30, which it was UTC -4, but it's going to be UTC -5 next week. So
there you go.
Oh yeah, how about that?
Fall back on Saturday, which is just an extra hour of gaming for a lot of us, but it won't be for me this weekend. I'm actually have to beg out of my tradition there. We're getting up early Sunday.
Hockey tournament?
No, that's Saturday.
Oh, okay.
So extra hour of sleep.
Yeah, that extra hour of sleep is great. So this was a really interesting show. I mean, besides they're finishing up with the budget stuff, I hadn't seen any of this policy stuff. And again, like I had said earlier, when we were thinking about topics and this was mentioned, I ran over to an Azure Friday video that Donovan Brown hosted.
Oh yeah.
It's really short, and I got a gist from it. But then now I see, wow, there was even a lot more. I guess, of course, it was just a 5-minute video. But there's a lot more. It's amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot you can put in those 5-minute videos. So, it's
helpful.
Definitely. And we've only, for certain parts of it, we touched the surface on. There's a whole other governance discussion around all of it.
I really was thinking about, maybe I'll still throw it together. And I'm not doing this to plug the event, but I was thinking about doing this at Tech Bash, like seriously, because like every time I go to an event, like no one's talking about Azure Policy.
Yeah.
I know it's not the sexiest thing. I think I need to come up with a title for it, like, how to keep control over your Azure subscription or something like that. To just show like the reason. Because if I go like
control your cloud,
intro to Azure Policy, that sounds like fun,
Right.
But control the cloud. Yeah, maybe I'll use that. I think
you're right. I think if you put the right title on it, you're going to get people there because everybody's got that. If it's not front and center in their mind, it's certainly back of their mind that, hey, I've got to keep a cost on things. I've got to keep things under control. So I think that'd be perfect.
Maybe like don't let your Azure subscription get out of control or something like. Yeah, I got to think about that. But I'd also have to write it, and we're like 2 weeks out from Tech Bash. Now the good thing is I can get it on the calendar because
you on the calendar,
so I can put it on the schedule. But
if you want to, I've got once I'm done the Tuesday session. If you want to, we'll do another tag team on it if you want.
Yeah, we'd have to polish it off. Like one thing that's fun about this show is like we're winging it, and a couple of demos like, I realized now you can't do this before that.
Right.
So we could figure some of those things out.
We got time.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, that's what this show's about, right? Like you learn, but then we learn too because we say, okay, we've shown you what we wanted to show you. Let's try a few things.
Right.
That's where it gets really fun. And sometimes, I think when we did the gRPC show, I think I was even surprised that I thought, we're not going to get very far on this, and then wow, it worked.
Yeah, if you like gRPC or you don't know what gRPC is,
look up here. There will be a link on the YouTube side.
I was going to say we're going to our YouTube archive, which is video.thedevtalkshow.com.
Right.
and because we did a good show on gRPC, we're actually getting some nice hits on that one. That one's actually doing pretty well.
Yeah, that was a fun show.
It was a fun show. It was totally brand new to me. Chris talked us through it, and I learned a lot on that show. That was fun.
Yeah. So there's a lot of great topics out, both on the programming side and on the Azure side. So it should be a lot of cool stuff coming.
Definitely.
And if you happen to catch like Game 7 of the World Series, let us know. Let us know who won.
Is that right?
Yeah, I have no idea, but it's been
tonight
exciting.
Game 7?
And
Tonight is
That
Game
shows
7.
how much I know about baseball.
So I mean, if you're watching from the future, tell us who we should have picked tonight. In any case,
I don't know. Yeah.
Marty McFly or
yeah.
whatever that guy. Biff.
Cubs beat
It was
Miami.
Biff, right?
Yeah,
Biff.
Yeah,
went
wow.
to-
That's taking me back. The crazy thing about it is that year has come and gone, right? The
Yes.
year of
That
Back
was-
to the Future 2. It was 2015, I think.
I think
wanna
so.
say.
Yeah, it was 30 years in the future.
Yeah. So,
Did they
wow.
predict that Donald Trump would be president or something like that? Or
Well,
no?
there was a Cubs beat Miami in the World Series, which was almost. I mean, the Cubs did win the World Series, but
Yeah.
I think the bigger shocker was that there was eventually a team in Florida and Miami and all that stuff, right? So
It's funny.
crazy. So all right,
We're gonna get us out of here.
That's pretty good. I think we're good, right?
Think
Yeah.
so. I think it's a show.
Fun show.
So yeah,
How do
so
you like sitting over here, by the way?
it's very different. I feel out of my element, being in front of the camera.
No, it was a good job tonight. Good job, both of you. And it was fun back here to try and figure out how to push all these buttons correctly and remember to look at that camera.
Right.
And also remember to turn the volume up and down so you're not getting my mouse clicks right
Not
now.
getting the background
I'm
noise.
pretty sure on the
Oh.
video.
That's a good idea.
I'm pretty sure on the video I spoke to you guys once and had this turned off. But we'll
It happens for me
Rich
once a
has
show.
done that.
Yeah.
Rich has done that. Yeah.
Cool. But great job back there spinning all the knobs and dials and pushing all the right buttons. So thank you to Chris for his rookie show of doing that. He did an awesome job. Andy, thank you for the awesome topic around Azure Policies. It was a lot of fun. It was good to talk about. And thank you for watching, whether live or on the archive. Feel free to subscribe as we've been mentioning, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next time. Thanks for joining.